Welcome to the DawgNation Happy Hour, presented by Marlowe's Tavern. A fun and laid-back look at everything happening around the Georgia Bulldogs and the latest UGA recruiting news there as well. Make sure you stop by the local Marlowe's Tavern right there in your neighborhood and enjoy Happy Hour every weekday from 4 to 6 p.m. And now, for DawgNation Happy Hour, here's your host, Kaylee Mansell.
Hello, DawgNation, and welcome to another very happy episode of the DawgNation Happy Hour. As always, I'm your self-acclaimed happy hour expert, Kaylee Mansell, and tonight I have two very special guests joining me. We have a lot on the happy hour menu for you tonight. We're going to do what Jeff Sentell does when he goes to order at a happy hour, a little bit of everything. And I want to remind you guys that the purpose of happy hour is to be able to relax, unwind, give you all the last minute details you need to know before heading into game day on Saturday. And just as a reminder, you can relax and unwind any weekday from 4 to 6 at a Marlowe's Happy Hour. So let's go ahead and get to the guest tonight. If he was a drink, he'd be Scotch on the rocks, and that is Mike Griffith. And if he was a drink, he'd be a Mai Tai. It's Jeff Sentell. And as always, we're going to start out with our happy hour question of the week. And in the spirit of the Deep South's oldest rivalries, I want to know, who would you select as your two favorite Georgia rivalries? Let's start with Mr. Mai Tai, Jeff Sentell.
Oh, I'm pretty close on the Mai Tai. I would probably say a Cuba Libre right there. But the two best Georgia rivalries, Georgia, Florida. I know Mike, we might have to do some convincing with Mike about that one, especially where the game was played. But for me, it's Georgia, Florida. And I guess the second one, you just got to say the Deep South's oldest. And if I say the Deep South's oldest, that's all I really need to say, Georgia, Auburn.
Well, I get to pick what drinks you are, and I pick a Mai Tai, so I don't really care what you have to say, Jeff. You're a Mai Tai. I mean, look at your background. Does that background not scream Mai Tai to you?
This right there, everybody talks about happy hour. I challenge anybody in the audience to find a happy hour than consuming their libations on the deck of a boat while looking at that. Now, Kaylee's got a good background set there. Mike looks like he's having stogies with Winston Churchill or maybe at a speakeasy somewhere. Those are both good, but I dare you to top that one right there. That one right there makes you want to just have one more. One more.
I don't know. I don't think I've seen a better one than Mike's yet. Mike's looks like a background where you go do like trivia and have happy hour at the same time.
Mike's got like Edgar Allan Poe back there. I think it looks like it's Edgar Allan Poe, man. Or maybe Gardner Minshew.
Okay, Mike, give me your two favorite Georgia rivalries.
Well, I think the Florida rivalry is been the most important, with the SEC East Division. And I think Florida's going to stay as the annual opponent. I think that's the priority. And, it's a border state, which I think is important. But, having covered other programs that played Georgia, having covered both Tennessee and Auburn, I can tell you that the passion runs much deeper for Tennessee, Georgia than Auburn, Georgia. You're always going to be number two to Auburn. Alabama-Auburn is the best rivalry in the Southeastern Conference, and the Auburn folks put a lot more priority on that. Tennessee burns pretty deep for Georgia because Tennessee works very hard, just like Auburn does, to recruit the city of Atlanta. Philip Fulmer once said, Tennessee considers Atlanta its home state, more so than Memphis. Because you think about the proximity of Atlanta to Knoxville, it's only 2.5 hours, whereas Memphis is a good 6 hours away. So it's been a very fierce rivalry. It's been, I think, a more competitive rivalry over time. Both programs pretty consistent, and Tennessee, it matters to Tennessee. Tennessee also has Alabama as a rival, and they would consider that probably their biggest rivalry. And they also have Florida as a rival. And they actually play home and home. And, Jeff, there's a rumor that Tennessee may want to move their game with Florida to Jacksonville.
Wow.
Because maybe they feel like they'll have a better chance against Florida down in Jacksonville. So we'll see. Right now it's Georgia that's selling out their hometown to play in Jacksonville every other year. We know why Florida wants to play there. It's 70 miles away from their campus. Makes a lot of sense. Certainly has helped their school districts as well as their park districts and their hospitals with that extra money that they get from the game. And it is a great rivalry, and the people in Florida really love it and thank the people of Georgia for their money in commerce every other year.
I am going to go with Mike right here. When I was thinking about this question last night, I thought back to 4-year-old, 5-year-old Kaylee, who couldn't even tell you what the quarterback was, but knew that we had to hate Florida and Tennessee. Yep. And I think that still carries over to this day. Those are the two games that I'm most passionate about. I watch every year, and those are the two games that you can't help but be just a little bit nervous about. Even when you're number one in the country, those are still two games that you never really know. I mean, but there's always that little voice in the back of your head telling you if somebody's going to do it, it's going to be one of those two teams, because not only is the fan base passionate about it, but the players understand that those are the games that hold the highest expectations. So I'm with Mike. I'm going to go Florida and Tennessee. And then let's touch a little bit about what happened in last week's game versus UAB before we start taking a look into Auburn. I want to open up the conversation with Brock Bowers. I mean, finally an outstanding game. We know what he's capable of, but I really don't feel like we've seen them maximize his potential and what he's capable of in the early games. He had 9 catches on Saturday for over 100 yards and multiple touchdowns, and that's the most we've seen him get the opportunity to do so all year. So, Mike, can we expect to see Bowers get the ball more as we head into conference play?
Well, this is going to sound strange, but I hope not, because he does look like Superman, I know, and he does seem indestructible. I mean, this is a guy that Jeff Sentell was telling us about, and frankly, we didn't believe Jeff. The way Jeff described this guy, it was like, Jeff, you say all these recruits are great, and you're saying, and by the way, they are. The recruiting rankings back that up. But Jeff told us this guy was going to be even better, and that was really hard to believe. You have to understand that, because number one, he was from Northern California, and how good is the high school football there? And number two, I believe he missed some time playing high school, and yet he was described as a guy that could play anywhere and do everything. He could run the ball effectively. He could catch the ball effectively. I've even seen him throw the ball effectively at a camp. It almost sounded too good to be true. And yet there he was. I selected him as the National Freshman of the Year for the Football Writers Association of America. You don't see tight ends often win honors like that. And he has been, I think, the most integral part, the most irreplaceable part of the Georgia football team the last 2 years. I think if you take Brock Bowers away, I'm not sure the Dogs have one title, much less 2. So he's carried this program. He's the most difficult matchup on the field. Every opposing defensive coach starts with number 19. Where is he? What is the plan? And the reason I say I hope not is because we're only 4 games into a 15-game season, and I want to see a healthy Brock Bowers in December and January. And I think it's important that Carson is able to utilize some of these other weapons. Perhaps Ladd McConkey comes back. Dominic Lovett, Ra Thomas are now learning the playbook. I think they'll get more involved as the season progresses. Marcus Rosemy-Jack Saint, not the explosive player that Adonai Mitchell was, but a strong possession guy that you can count on. And Dylan Bell, I think, a really versatile weapon that's growing out of the backfield. So my comfort zone, and I'll be interested to hear what Jeff says, my comfort zone for Bowers is about 5 to 7 touches, 100 yards, and a touchdown a game. If you could give me that every week, I'd be good. But when you start going with 10 catches, 11 catches, and then the final point, Kaylee, 110 of his 120 yards receiving came after the catch. That means Carson's basically giving him a glorified handoff on a quick pass, and we're watching Brock run over or through 3 or 4 people. And that's not exactly the easiest way for those yards to come. So those are my thoughts on Brock Bowers. I think he's the statue. I think 100 years from now when we talk about the Georgia football program, Brock Bowers is going to be the guy that we're going to see in a statue in front of Kirby Smart, Sanford Stadium.
Well, Mike, I'm glad that you brought up Brock Bowers from a recruiting standpoint, because that is one thing I wanted to touch on with Jeff. Jeff, not only do I want you to expand on what Mike said, but if you were able to see the type of player that Brock Bowers could have been, like, what was it about him in high school that made you realize he was going to be that guy?
Yeah, there's a lot. There's a lot to go from there. I'll take the recruiting thoughts first. I'm kind of working on a story in my back pocket about kind of 10, maybe 11 random events that shaped the 2023 Georgia football team. And I'll show you some of my work here. Like for Brock Bowers, and this is going to make folks probably reach for another drink during your program, but remember Brock was being recruited during COVID.
Yep.
And my dates are pretty close on this. I think it's like February. And Brock decides, and I think his best offer at the time was Nevada, the University of Nevada. And Brock decides, I'm going to go to the Open. There was one in Las Vegas, I believe. And Brock goes there and kind of gets discovered. And when I mean discovered, people outside of Napa Valley learned about him then because he was like 6'2", 6'3", maybe 215, 220 pounds. And he ran a 4.5 laser 40. And that was the part where national guys, even like with his wide reach, Todd Hartley, that's when he came to know Brock because it was like, hold on, this height, this weight, this speed. And to think about this for a second, you know how life was back then. We never knew what was happening with the pandemic. But like, let's say he had, to help his dad cut up some logs in the front yard, or let's say like his girlfriend needed him for something that weekend, and he doesn't go to that opening. Well, here's what happens. Like the pandemic shroud comes down like a couple of weeks later, and there are no more openings. There is no more ways for Brock Bowers to be tested and to run a 40, and for everybody around the country to realize, oh my gosh, what do we have here? Shortly after that time came out, national guys started recruiting him. Todd Hartley prioritized him, certainly to the umpteenth degree. But I've always wondered, if and I even asked him about this during, I think it was the Ohio State Media Week. And I was like, you ever thought about what might happen with your career if you did not go to the opening and get tested? Because he didn't have a senior year of high school football. And then, that would have been up and down whether he even makes his way to Georgia. Now, there's a lot more on the roster, and certainly there'd be some way for Brock to send some film or send some tape. Another way I just really knew from doing this a long time is I had people that were in the AAU circuit, the 7-on-7 circuit down in California, and they were telling me, Brock goes to a 7-on-7, and he probably averages about 15 or 16 touchdowns. And that was like, listen, I go to all the 7-on-7s in the world, and the 5-star receivers, the Jeremiah Smiths, the Jaden Hazelwoods, the Mike Matthews, they probably only have about 8 or 9 touchdowns during a day tournament. So when you think about it, yeah, maybe California football isn't what Georgia high school, Southeast high school football is, but you're talking about a tight end literally taking over these 7-on-7 events. And I know about this too, Kaylee, considering what he did at UAB and his kind of career resume against the Blazers. I think his middle name or his nickname may need to be Sir Brock Bowers Targaryen because of what he's done against the Blazers. I mean, really, it was kind of like a lull in his junior season because everybody was projecting, will he get to New York? Will he be in the Heisman Final Five? Will he be a top 5 NFL pick? And he had a little bit of a lull in his junior year, markedly due to injury or whatever, but he righted the ship against that. And I mean, it's just so much fun to watch him play. Like I tell folks that were, I was like 4 years old at the time, maybe, or something like that. But when you hear Sanford, that gust of wind whenever Brock touches the ball, that's sort of like what it was in Sanford when Herschel got the ball.
So what I'm hearing is Sir Brock Bowers, first of his name, and king of the UAB Blazers. That has a nice ring to it. He should put that on his business card, Jeff.
I mean, he looks like a Percival or a Galahad. You get him with his helmet off. He takes his helmet off, and he's got all that swept back hair and everything. And he looks like he just slayed 15 dragons, especially when folks try to tackle him. I mean, some of these things are just like Mortal Kombat moves where he's just like, get over here and throwing him over there. Right? He's like the VIP bartender at the club saying, nope, you're not getting up in there. Such a special player for Georgia.
All right, now let's get down to the nitty-gritty here. Brandon Adams brought up a really good point on his post-game show on Saturday, and I think that's something that we've all been feeling is that we are 1/3 of the way through the season, but it still kind of feels like we're waiting on the season to start. It seems like a common theme with the Dogs so far has been a slow start on offense in the first quarter. Defense doesn't look great in the second quarter, and then we come out the second half and be explosive. I don't know what the locker room conversations are at halftime, but, people are saying whatever is said then needs to be said before the game. Is a slow start in the first half something we need to be seriously concerned about moving forward? Mike?
No, I think you've seen a pretty vanilla version of Georgia so far. I think South Carolina was a pretty contested game, being down 14-3 against, I think, the best quarterback in the SEC and maybe the best quarterback in the nation this year. I mean, Spencer Rattler has been absolutely spectacular, and without the best supporting cast. I mean,
Right.
Can you imagine if you put him on the Georgia football team right now? Wow. So I'm going to say that was a bit of a game for Georgia, but I do think that a lot of what we're seeing is very vanilla, and Kirby and his coaches make outstanding halftime adjustments. I don't think it's a matter of effort or so much as maybe execution. Frankly, the offensive pieces outside of Brock Bowers, not up to par with where last year's were, not as experienced in many cases. Remember, Ladd McConkey hasn't played yet, and that was your best receiver coming back. And Dominic Lovett and Ra Thomas, while both very talented, are first-year players that are getting comfortable in a new scheme. And Carson Beck is a new quarterback. I think he's in line with Stetson Bennett. I don't think the quarterback play has been the difference. I think the difference has been the supporting cast and the execution early on. So what I wonder, Kaylee, and Jeff as well, is just how much more aggressive Kirby might be with the game plan, both offensively and defensively. To be clear, Mike Bobo works for Kirby Smart. That is the head coach's offense that you're seeing. He sets the parameters for Bobo, and then Bobo designs the play calls and the run-pass ratio as Kirby wants. And then they send Carson to the line, and then Carson adjusts the play based on what the defense is giving. And so what you've seen is very high percentage, very careful offense to this point. Georgia can and will be more aggressive offensively and defensively as needed, Kaylee.
Jeff, do you agree with that?
I think we should just look at Georgia's first 4 games as what it is. It's been a preseason.
Yeah.
Now, there's some folks that could spout out opinions and say, well, maybe Georgia's reached the point where they just play about 3 or 4 games anyway. That would be the SEC championship game. That might be the Tennessee road game. That might be week 1 of the BCS and might be the second week of the playoffs. It's not too far from the truth, especially the way the seasons are going to be measured. I thought Mike was cooking with some really good gas there when he's talking about first-year players. And I want to take that to another level. And I want to just I want folks to evaluate this team, and I want them to look at it like I hear a lot of people making comparisons and saying things about Carson, and they're comparing Carson to what Stetson was last year. And I think that's just the wrong way to do it. Like Stetson was 24. Stetson had started 2020, 2021, and 2022 for Georgia. He had all those confidence games. And if you want to be pretty real about it, you should compare Carson's first 4 games with Stetson's first 4 games that 2020 season in Arkansas. And then when you measure that, you're going to be, you know what? 15 looks pretty sporty, looks pretty good for what he's done right now. I cannot stress enough, first-year Ra Thomas, first-year Dominic Lovett, first-year Carson Beck. You lose Amarius Mims. The one hole in the heart of this offense nobody talks about with run game is Devin Willock. Hashtag do it for Dev. When you've had Brock Bowers limited, and I think Georgia's going to get a spark whenever Lawson Lucky comes back. So I know Mike will probably keep the receipts on this. I think I've said this somewhere that I think Lawson's floor in a scouting terms is probably about 70% of what you've seen of Brock. I think he can be that good at Georgia. He's going to be physical in the run game. He's going to run great routes. He's got almost Brock Bowers level speed. And then Georgia can really roll with its tight ends. I want everybody to think of something. I'll probably put it up on social media this weekend or this week. I've been to so many Georgia games, been to so many moments down on the field where the young men are running out of the tunnel. And it was, I don't want to say disturbing, but I would say striking about after all the healthy players ran through, the number of Georgia Bulldogs that ran through the tunnel, or not ran through, walked, sashayed through the tunnel in street clothes. You saw Kendall Milton, you saw Branson Robinson, you saw Roderick Robinson, you saw Tyranningham Dawkins on a scooter, you saw Amarius Mims, you saw Chris Peel, you saw Denylin Morissette, you saw so many, like, oh, Jeff, you're the recruiting guy. They've got so much talent. Well, this is really a despicable sort of bad luck. That's what's happened to Georgia. When Kirby makes that statement about, hey, Ron Corson's never had an injury list that long, I believe him, because you can only look at it right there. Watching them run out of the tunnel, you're like, that was probably the first string running back. That was probably the impact defensive lineman. That was probably the second string running back and third string running back. Think about this. The new SEC rules say you can bring 74 to Auburn, 74 players. And I'm just betting the Georgia will have 3 walk-on running backs probably make that trip to Auburn for an SEC game. And, folks, we have never seen this. Like, if you think Savon Clark's coming, yeah, he's probably going to make it. Cash Jones, yeah, he's probably going to make it. And you think about the healthy running backs Georgia has and how it's really been a displaced shift, polar opposite identity for the Georgia Bulldogs in just 2 years, where everybody wanted to see him throw the ball. And Georgia, all he do is ground and pound. Kirby wants that. Protect the defense, slow the game. And now you've got a team that must rely on its passing might to win these games. And these extended handoffs are a great point, because Mike brought that up. That's really what you're seeing with Brock right now, that extension of the run game.
Well, I think
Kaylee, if you weigh in here, I got some statistics that I ran just the other day, and I ran it because there was a pretty highly ranked wide receiver recruit, that many people are anticipating will flip to Florida State. And the immediate reaction was that, well, Georgia doesn't throw the ball enough. And that, if Carson would just do more. Well, here's some numbers for you on the run-pass ratio of 3 programs. And I think if I asked you who threw the ball most between Georgia, Florida State, and Tennessee, you would probably guess it would be Tennessee, as high profile as Josh Heupel's offense is. Mm-hmm. But actually, Tennessee has a higher run ratio than either Florida State or Georgia. In fact, Tennessee has 147 handoffs and 133 pass attempts.
Wow.
And Georgia has 148 pass attempts and only 138 rushes. And if you're asking about Florida State, and a lot of people are proposing that this young man from South Georgia will flip to Florida State because of a run-pass ratio or perhaps a teammate, the Seminoles are even up, 125 rush and 125 pass. Georgia, the most pass-happy program of the 3. So I think sometimes, Kaylee, and forgive me for the interruption, but I think sometimes perception overtakes reality.
Well, I'm glad that you came in with the receipts right there. Jeff and I were talking about a certain wide receiver who may be going to Florida State now. It took a lot of mental and physical energy to take someone's name off the pretty slides that I make every week last night. So I'm glad that you gave us some insight on that, because you're right. I would have guessed Tennessee just specifically based off the way their coach likes to play and the quarterback that they have on hand. So I think that's really good insight that people that watch Happy Hour need to hear. Now, I do want to address the fact that coming into UAB this past Saturday, a big struggle for the Dogs this far has been red zone efficiency. Now, I know we don't have the same roster or the same offensive coordinator or the same quarterback that we had last year, but in 16 times of being in the red zone, we had only scored 9 times. But this past Saturday, we scored all 6 times we were in the red zone. Mike, what was the biggest contributor to that, and how important is that statistic moving forward?
Well, frankly, the biggest contributor was UAB on the other side of the ball, and they're not very good, if we're going to be completely honest about it. The other team has a lot to do with your statistics. And I think in a general sense, though, Kaylee, this is where you miss Stetson Bennett the most, is probably in the red zone because of Stetson's mobility. And anytime you have a quarterback with mobility, it's almost like adding another offensive player. And that's important because once you get in the red zone, the defense essentially adds another player. And that player is the back of the end zone. The field's not as big, and so defenses don't have to leave their safeties as deep. There's not as much field to cover. So I like a mobile quarterback in the red zone. Who knows? Maybe Kirby dusts off a little Brock Vandegrift red zone package at some point this season. When you talk about a quarterback that can run, that's a really talented guy. Maybe in the Tim Tebow sense, right? So I think that the mobile quarterback helps teams out a lot in the red zone. You see it in the NFL. And I also think that the lack of a power run game hurts quite a bit. You mentioned Kendall Milton's injury. I personally had visions of Kendall Milton growing into that sort of dynamic power runner that we've seen in the form of, some of the great backs, Nick Chubb, and I think Sony Michel was also very good when he gets in close. I'll give this to Zamir White, Jeff, that I thought Zamir was good inside the 5, certainly had enough carries in there to become a very good goal line back. Todd Gurley. And I thought that Kendall, when he was a freshman, we saw him make some dynamic, explosive runs. But unfortunately, the injuries have plagued him throughout his career. And now he did flash at the end of last year, and that's the guy I thought we'd have at the beginning of this year. And I still think we might see that guy before the end of the year. But missing him is definitely a factor. I think that young Roderick Robinson, I see a 240-pound specimen that I think Kirby envisioned could grow into that guy. And I think Kirby still wants him to get more physical. You hear the head coach talk about running behind your pads, right? You don't need the dancing bear. You need him to use the 240-pound forward lean. Ironically enough, it's actually been the wide receiver that's transitioning that's shown me the most forward lean and the sharpest nose for the goal line. So I think the run game, the power run game remains a work in progress. The offensive line has not performed quite as well as anticipated to this point. I think there's improvement going on there. There's some new pieces. And I've been encouraged by what I've seen with Dylan Fairchild, with what he's shown us already. Xavier Truss at right tackle, so that when Amarius Mims does come back, there's going to be some competition for playing time, because I think those young men have both stepped up in their new roles. And I think Georgia will become more effective as the season progresses with the run game. And you just wonder a little bit, keep that in the back of your mind about Brock Vandegrift and what he might be able to bring in certain packages.
Jeff, do you agree with that? Do you think that the reason we were more efficient on Saturday in the red zone was because of our opponent, or maybe perhaps that Brock Bowers seems to score every single time we give him the ball in the red zone?
I think Mike hit on a lot of points right there. I'm a little taken back by the Kendall Milton melt video that we showed during Mike's comments, because I was there for all that, and I was there for putting his video together. I remember I got the call from his father, and he's like, "Listen, man, we need to put a video together. Can you do that?" And he's like, "How quickly?" He's like right now. And Connor and I got on a plane, and we shot the video in his house with his family. I mean, the food that they had, the mac and cheese, I will never forget. But like, what goes through my mind about Kendall is, man, those were hopeful, inspirational days. Like when he did that thing with his guns and he does like that, I'm like, that dude is going to roll the rock at Georgia. And he still hadn't gotten a chance. I'm glad Mike did bring up Zamir White, because I think Zamir White's career, while he's not the All-American or the All-SEC back, I think it kind of shows you can't just plug anyone in there and get a lot of the results. Like, you can look maybe above average at Georgia, and in the end, that might be something pretty special compared to the rest of the conference, because I think the run game is starving for, I think, the availability and also the touches that Zamir had in time. But I just think, here's what I think, Kaylee, to answer your question quickly. I think Georgia gets defended in the red zone differently, especially if you look at Carson Beck. He's already has 2 or 3 rushing touchdown opportunities. He has at least 2 this year. Now, he's a pretty good athlete. I bet if we put him on a basketball court right now with some really good players, I think Carson could get to about 15 points. He's that talented. He's got that type of handles. He's that type of athlete. He used to get 20, 25 in AAU basketball. I just think, and the other thing that's pretty telling is, think about this. Like, I think Mike kind of went through a lot of his points about Georgia doesn't have a big back. Like, who's going to get the rushing touchdowns on Saturday? It's probably going to be either Andrew Paul, Dylan Bell, Dejon Edwards, or Cash Jones. There's not one guy there that's 215, 225, the Georgia bell cow back. So Georgia's doing things differently. And I think the other thing is they really don't have that go up and get it receiver that's emerged yet. Even Dominic Lovett, he's not going to win. He's going to win in space. He's not going to win in the red zone where, like that, Mike brought up the extra defender and the goal line and how things are so compressed there. I really think Georgia, did they do it a lot when they had George Pickens? No, because it was so much easier to do it with Stetson Bennett. But you don't see a lot of those times where, unless it's Brock Targaryen wearing the cape, first of his name, going up and getting the ball like he did against South Carolina a year ago in Columbia, that spectacular play there. There's not really a guy that you want to feed the ball to in the red zone. Brock's probably the guy, but sometimes the temptation there is, can we get him the ball on a short screen or a jet sweep, and that'd work just as well.
Well, gentlemen, one thing I do have to admit before we get into Auburn preview is I have never been to an away game other than Georgia Tech. And one thing that everybody keeps telling me is how awesome this Auburn atmosphere is, how loud it's going to be. I learned about the eagle soaring through and that it's not a robot and that it's actually trained to do that, which I don't know if I'm going to believe that until I see it. And so it got me thinking about game day atmospheres, and maybe it's because I didn't have breakfast this morning and I'm craving some Marlowe's fish tacos, but we're going to do a Mount Rushmore this week, and it kind of revolves around game day atmosphere, not just college game day atmosphere, but high school. I know you both have daughters. I'm sure they played sports. What is your Mount Rushmore of concession stand snacks? And that can be anything. It can be drinks, candy, chips, like the meal itself. What would be your 4 concession stand snack go-tos? Jeff Sentell, I'm going to come to you first.
So some of these are probably stuff that I used to eat when I could eat not so healthy and not so clean. But like, I kind of think the things that come to my mind, and I think I'm allowed to say this, even though you had the high school imagery there, was I think when I think tailgates, I think it's got to be a bucket of fried chicken. It just absolutely has to be. It's got to be some kind of dip. It's got to be a Bloody Mary, and it's also when you think about tailgate and game day spread, I think you can't go wrong with something that's some sort of dish, something sweet. I would say something like everybody's got cookies. Everybody's got like some oatmeal raisin cookies. Now, listen, I've been to some tailgates. Have you ever been to a tailgate at Ole Miss where they have like something called a shot ski, where like it's literally a ski from Aspen or whatever, and they tape shot glasses onto it, and like 4 or 5 people do one of those shot skis at a time. Those are the things that come to mind. And one thing we're going to make sure we do, we're going to take a mental note. Kaylee, we will get a picture with you and the Auburn Eagle on Saturday, because it is going to be breathtaking. You'll be there on the sidelines, and maybe once you're in Auburn and you're in Jordan-Hare, make sure you get that little syrup over the Jordan to make sure you pronounce it authentically. But when you go through that, and Georgia Auburn are almost like 2 cousins that get into a fight in the backyard at Thanksgiving, because you look at it, their stadium models are the same. Pat Dye was a great player at Georgia. He went on to be a great coach at Auburn. Ben Stilley was a great player at Auburn. He went on to be a great coach at Georgia. There's so much, I don't like the term here, but there's so much back and forth of Auburn and Georgia connected throughout the years, going all the way back to 1892, that I think that's what makes Jordan-Hare in a game on the loveliest plain, not the plains, and eliminated Toomer's Corner so special.
Now, while you've been talking, I've been watching Mike, and Mike looks like he's experienced an array of emotions while this is going on, starting with number 1, why the heck are we doing this? And then I could start to see the wheels in his head turn, like, okay, he's really, really thinking about it, and now maybe he has an answer. Mike, last week we started to switch up things a little bit, try to throw in some happy hour topics. Jeff went more tailgate food. I don't really do a lot of tailgating, but you are open to interpretation. You can take this for what it is. Do you have anything? Because you look like you've got it down pat here.
Yeah, well, first of all, Jeff didn't really answer your question.
Yeah,
he turned it into a tailgate. It was a concession stand question, Jeff. There's no fried chicken at concession stands. So
when you eat before a game, that's what I don't go to no stand. I don't do a concession stand. We got no time to go into a concession stand. No lines.
Oh, you used to cover high school football. You can't tell me that at any of those high school football games you didn't go get you a halftime snack.
Well, of course, but yeah. I don't cross-reference that with tailgating before a game. That's just eating. That's just food.
So
Mike,
Jeff
him right
would have turned your question. So Jeff would have turned your question into tailgate, and in fact, did turn it into a tailgate. I was going to go with the Mount Rushmore of college football game day environments, but you took us away from that. And how only your generation could think that was an Eagle, that would have never crossed my mind. And I actually covered Auburn football in '93. That was my first SEC beat, and they went undefeated, 11-0 that year under Terry Bowden. In fact, Georgia right now is tied with Auburn with their 20 straight wins that Auburn was able to get done back there in 93 and 94. So, Kaylee, I do follow directions, and it's not as sexy or as fun as Jeff's answer, but I am a peanut M&Ms guy.
Love it.
They can satisfy and fill you up. Cotton candy is really hard to resist. It's not good for you. And if you're going to get the big pretzel, you've got to get it with mustard. I used to do the what were those sour straws?
Oh,
those things,
Airhead Extremes, like they're the rainbow colored ones. Like yes, I love that, Mike. That was actually what I used to eat after every high school basketball game. I would go get the Airhead Extremes, but I'm such a weirdo that I would have to like get all the sour stuff off first and then eat it. Like it's hard to explain. I know I'm a weird person, but it was always a Sprite and Airhead Extremes after a basketball game that we probably lost. So I guess that was like the slump buster, But okay, concession stand snacks. Y'all know I'm very passionate about this. I use every advantage I can take of being at high school football games on Fridays. And so my first one, I had this at Oconee County. I know that's right by your house, Mike. So if you haven't had the chance to, you need to go have a Frito pie from Oconee County. Comes in the Frito bag, taco meat. Some people put chili on it. I'm not really a massive fan of that, but like sour cream, cheese, and you just eat it out of the bag. So it's so convenient. And I see a lot of schools do that now. So I'm going to go that because I love Fritos. It's so underrated. People look at me like I'm crazy when I tell them that. Second one I'm going to go is popcorn. I'll get the whole thing, and my eyes are always bigger than my stomach. Like, football game popcorn is different. It's not like the kind you can buy at the store. It's not the kind that you get at the movie theaters. It's so salty that you don't have any taste buds by the end of it, but it secure or satisfies this hunger that you can't get anywhere else. I'm going to go Snickers bar also because it's like the commercials say, you're not you when you're hungry. A Snickers bar at halftime can really change your mindset on everything. And then the last one, this really depends on where you go, but you can't stray away from a good concession stand cheeseburger, especially when it's one of those places where you know that the grill probably hasn't been washed in like 4 or 5 years, so it's just collected all that grease and seasoning over time. So specifically those. But yes, I love that Mike was the one to follow instructions and Jeff wasn't, because I wasn't sure how Mike was going to receive the question. We couldn't have done game day atmospheres because I've never been to anything other than a UGA college football game, so I don't feel like I could have answered that properly. All right, now that we've done that, we've got our concession stand Mount Rushmore's out of the way. Make sure to comment y'all's below. Let's talk about Auburn a little bit. Obviously, Dogs are going on the road for their first away game, going to face Auburn and first-year coach Hugh Freeze. We all saw the video of Hugh maybe or maybe not knowing that Kirby Smart had led the Dogs to a national championship appearance in year 2. Auburn's had some struggles with coaching over the last decade or so. So, Mike, I want to go to you first. What do you think Hugh Freeze would have to accomplish in year 1 in order for his first season to be considered a success?
Well, I think there's a couple things. I think Auburn needs to be bowling again. So a postseason bid is important. And then I think they need to get a rivalry win. They need to beat somebody they're not supposed to beat. They need to knock off an Alabama or an Auburn or perhaps an LSU on their roster. I see that's on the agenda. Ole Miss at home would be a very big win over Lane Kiffin, particularly since Kiffin was rumored to be so close to taking the job. I think if Auburn gets a marquee win and finds their way to a bowl game, and then if they land a good recruiting class, it's something that Jeff Sentell obviously follows very closely. If they can begin to make inroads once again in the state of Georgia and start landing some of those elite players, if they can recruit in football in Georgia like Bruce Pearl has recruited in basketball, Auburn is a program that can get to the top quickly. And it's interesting when you talk about some of the coaches that have left Auburn on bad terms. And it's crazy to me when I think about how successful Terry Bowden was. Mm-hmm. And of course, I think that there was still a lot of followers of Coach Dye. And I don't think Terry ever quite got out of Pat Dye's shadow, even though he did win 20 games in a row and have an undefeated season. And, I think about Tommy Tuberville And here's another guy who had an undefeated season in '04 and wasn't allowed to play for the national title that year. And then you think about Gus Malzahn, one of the few coaches that beat Nick Saban twice and pounded a pretty good #1 Georgia team in 2017. And my goodness, even for that matter, they won a national championship with a coach that was fired 2 years later. So when you look at what has been accomplished there, once again, we were talking earlier about how perception overtakes reality. You had two coaches with undefeated seasons in Terry Bowden and Tommy Tuberville, and Georgia really hadn't had one between Vince Dooley and Kirby Smart. And yet there was that perception that Auburn had coaching issues. Maybe they had sustainability issues, largely because of the 365-day rivalry that even Kirby says puts Auburn and Alabama on another level. I know that Georgia fans don't like to hear that. They enjoy the Florida rivalry so much. And again, maybe if they saw it a little closer to home, it would be different. But but that being an in-state rivalry really keeps Auburn pinned down, so that even when they've raised up and had some success, and I lived this as an Auburn beat writer for 2 years, I saw it. And then I switched over and I was an Alabama beat writer for a few years. So I saw that rivalry from both sides, and it's fascinating. And Kaylee, I'm excited that you're going to get to go to Jordan-Hare Stadium, because it is loud, it is unique, and you'll think that you're in the stadium of a national champion. Wow. Even last year when I went there for the LSU game, as bad as Auburn was, as much as they were struggling, that atmosphere was incredible. Those fans were very supportive. And when I looked up at the scoreboard in the middle of the second quarter, it said Auburn 17 and LSU 0. Now, LSU would win the game, but I'm going to tell you, that Jordan-Hare Stadium crowd is fierce. And for those people who watch Go With The Flow with Brandon Adams, he can throw some gambling stats out there that'll turn you upside down, and he'll tell you just how many times Auburn has won there as an underdog. It might put a little chill through your spine.
Jeff, so I want to take this and turn it into a recruiting perspective. It seems like a decade ago, Auburn was really competitive in the recruiting realm of the SEC footprint. It doesn't seem like they've had as much success in recent years. What has been the primary reason for that? Is it not being able to get the in-state on the border kids? Is it because they've had coaching inconsistencies? Can they not compete with NIL? What do you think has been the biggest contributor to the lack of success in Auburn's recruiting?
Yeah, I think it's pretty easy. Aside from Owen Pappoe, which, look at it now, Georgia got Nakobe Dean instead of Owen. I can't really think of a recruiting battle that Auburn has beaten Georgia for. And I think the answer here today in real time is the same thing as the answer was 5, 6, 7, 8 years ago. You look at Auburn now and everybody's kind of sticking their chest out and they're like, we got some recruiting. We're number 14 in the country. Yeah, you are, but you're number 5 in the conference. And the teams that are all recruiting better than you, Florida's the second best recruiting team in the country right now. Then it's Alabama, then it's Tennessee, then it's LSU. You're never going to get where Auburn fans probably feel they deserve to be when you may be 14 in the country, but you're 5th in the conference. That's 4 losses a lot of times on your schedule. They don't play Florida every year, so probably it's like 3. I just feel that Auburn's downslope has coincided with the rise of Georgia and the continued perch that Alabama has had. To answer your earlier point, I think really the only thing successful for Auburn is to probably be top 3 in the conference, maybe get ahead of an LSU, maybe get ahead of a Tennessee. And I think that's going to be Auburn's going to have to really decide. Maybe they get better when they stop paying off coaches. They've really got to decide whether they want to go full foray into the NIL game, because you see teams that are spending in NIL, Texas A&M, Florida State, Miami, USC, Colorado. I think Auburn needs to be one of the leaders in there, and they've already tried to be in that avenue as well. But that's the only way you're going to catch a Georgia or an Alabama. And I think success for Auburn, I think really means Alabama's a little wobbly this year, and in that game, sometimes records get tossed out of the window, even when there's a 3 and 4 win differential for either side. I think Hugh Freeze and Alabama could have a dismal 3 and 8 season, but if they make it 4 and 8 when they beat Alabama, that would cover all the checks. That would raise the boats of the NIL funding whatsoever. and to always try to make sure I turn in my assignments on time with our bartender here, I would say nachos, deep fried Oreos are my best high school concession stand. And the other thing that really grabs me is I love the late season, November, December hot chocolates, where you can go up to the hot chocolate person and you can say, I want 7, and you take it back to your fellow reporters or fellow photographers on the sideline or your television crew each and every week. There's nothing like hot chocolate when you can see your breath, like NFL film style, Steve Sable style, see your breath on a November Friday afternoon. That's what's great. And I also must report, I know the fans are probably honest, the audience are probably honest. Yes, Mike, I am going to get those Tennessee run game pass ratio stats to Mike Matthews at Parkview High School, 5-star receiver in the state of Georgia that's currently going to Tennessee, and let him peruse that material at his leisure.
All right, I have 2 more things here, then we got to wrap up. We'll do one that's kind of longer, one that's a little bit shorter. So Kentucky, Florida, happening this week. Will the winner of Kentucky, Florida prove to be UGA's biggest threat in the East? Mike, you are our designated SEC guy. What do you think?
Well, that's tough because I do think that where Georgia is right now from a physicality standpoint and a team health standpoint does bring some concerns with Kentucky coming in next week, particularly if it's a Kentucky team that's coming off a win over Florida. We don't really know the identity of Georgia yet. I think we're going to get a very clear picture Saturday night. I think we know the DNA, but a lot of these guys are unproven beyond the second half against South Carolina, a program that, quite frankly, I think is only a 7-win program. And I don't think it was like coming back against Ohio State when you beat them. I think that was a team you probably should have beat by 4 or 5 touchdowns based on the talent differential. So my answer is going to be no, though. My answer is going to be no because I have very little faith in Florida. I think the win over Tennessee was a bit of a mirage. They rode the momentum and the power, the passion of the Swamp, one of the greatest game day atmospheres out there, right there with Sanford Stadium and Jordan-Hare. I don't think Florida beats Tennessee on a neutral field. They certainly wouldn't have beaten them in Neyland Stadium. I think Tennessee remains the biggest threat because they're different. Kentucky is not going to out Georgia. At the end of the day, they're going to come in, they're going to play physical. They're not going to, they're not going to try to do too much throwing the ball. They're going to try to out Kirby. And even as down as Georgia is, because that game's in Sanford Stadium, I just think the Dogs can dig in and gut one out against the Kentucky. And it's always a physical game. You think about 2020, it was a 13-3 game and Jordan Davis got hurt. That was a very dark day, that October 31st day, with Jordan suffering the elbow injury and Richie LeCount getting in the very scary motorcycle wreck. Georgia essentially beat Kentucky, but lost the SEC East that day with the Jordan Davis injury and the Richie LeCount motorcycle injury. Okay. And so that was costly. And then I think about other games where Kentucky's come in and slugged it out. And you don't think of, maybe some people don't think of Kentucky as a black and blue team, but they really are. Win, lose, or draw, you know it when you've played Kentucky. That is the personality of that team. The good news for Georgia is you have 2 bye weeks after that. You get to go to Nashville and listen to country music and beat up on a program that doesn't care about college football in Vanderbilt, and then you get to rest your players. I don't know what's more fun for the players. They'll probably enjoy both of those weekends. Coming off a bye week, I think Kirby's won I want to say 18 or 19 in a row, some ridiculous number. And you might say, what about the 2020 Florida game? Well, they didn't have a bye week that year. So you got to go back all the way to the bowl game against Texas, the last time Kirby Smart lost, when he had more than 1 week to prepare. So I'm not worried about the Gators. Tennessee's different enough. And Georgia may blow them out. But because they're so different, because what they do really can't be replicated, that makes them dangerous. And I don't know what the weather's going to be like that day. That could be a factor. It's in November. Neyland Stadium is very loud, as you know, or as you will know, Kaylee. It's probably in that top 4 or 5 stadiums in the league. I would say it is for sure. And if Tennessee is if Joe Milton is throwing strikes that day, they could be dangerous. Mm-hmm. They could. And we don't know yet if Georgia's the team that can keep up. We don't know who the officiating crew is going to be. Things like this make a difference. And home teams have built-in advantages. So while I can't tell you there's one specific team I look at on the schedule and say, I think they're going to beat Georgia, I don't. But from a cumulative standpoint, you're talking about a program that's won 20 games in a row right now. And sometimes the odds catch up with you. I don't think it's going to be Kentucky. I don't think Stoops can out Kirby. I don't think it's going to be Florida and Jacksonville. Kirby's got an extra week. We just talked about how fantastic his coaching staff is. So I'm going to say Tennessee for two reasons. One, it's on the road. And two, because what they do is so different than other teams.
All right, now, last thing, we're going to do our greatest of all time segment. I just want you to say the first team that pops into your head because we got to wrap up here. Jeff, we'll start with you. What is the greatest UGA football team to not make a national championship appearance?
Pretty simple. 92 Georgia that had Eric Zier, Andre Hastings, and Garrison Hurst. They turned the ball over 7 times against Tennessee, or 6 times against Tennessee and Heath Schuler. Probably the greatest one, I think, that never made the final dance.
Mm-hmm. Mike. Yes,
I'd say the 2000. It's not recency bias, I promise. At 2018 Georgia, if they beat Alabama, if DeAndre Walker doesn't get injured in that game, then they beat Alabama, they win the national championship.
I said 2002. We won the SEC championship that year. Almost went undefeated. Lost to Florida. Won the Sugar Bowl. Beat 5 top 25 teams. Had all the tools to do it, but the college football playoff isn't set up like it is today. I know all this concession stand talk probably has all you fans at home hungry, so make sure to check out your local Marlowe's any weekday from 4 to 6 for happy hour. You can try the Nashville hot chicken sliders or their firecracker deviled eggs, or my personal favorite, which is fish tacos. But as always, thank you for allowing us to be here, Marlowe's, and make sure you go give them a shot. And then we are going to hopefully have another Marlowe's night for you guys coming up soon. But until then, you've got 2 days to prepare for game day at Auburn on Saturday. Have a very happy Thursday. Get your pregame in Friday. Have some of that tailgate food Jeff Sentell was talking about early on Saturday. And we will see you for the DawgNation pregame show. Good night, everyone, and go Dogs. Hey guys, sorry about cutting y'all off there. I didn't realize that if we don't keep the show for under an hour that it apparently won't schedule. So I'm sorry about that, guys. Hi. I'm okay. I'm about to